The Roaring Twenties. The name itself just conjures up these images, right? Glittering parties, jazz music, all this rebellion. But what if I told you that just beneath the surface of all that glamour, there was this deep, intense conflict brewing, one that would basically shape the rest of the century? So in this explainer, we're going to peel back the layers and look at the real contradictions of an era that was all about celebrating the new, but also fighting a massive battle for the soul of America.
So yeah, we all have this picture in our heads of jazz clubs and flappers. But what was really powering all of that? What was the true source of that roar? Was it really just about the parties and the good times? Or was something much, much deeper going on? Well, let's find out.
Okay, so at its absolute core, the Roaring Twenties was a decade of massive change, a total break from traditional values. It was this moment where America just sprinted away from its past and threw itself headfirst into this new idea of modernity. And we're not talking about a slow, gentle change here. This was a revolution in how people lived, how they worked, and really how they saw the entire world.
And nothing captured that sprint towards the modern better than the culture. The sound of jazz, the look of the flapper, the whole attitude of the decade felt completely brand new. This was a generation that was absolutely determined to invent its own style. And they did it with a flair that, let's be honest, we are still talking about 100 years later.
This timeline really shows you the building blocks of that cultural revolution. So you start in 1920, and boom, the 19th Amendment gives women a powerful new political voice. Then, all through the decade, the Harlem Renaissance gives an incredible cultural voice to African Americans. And then, by 1927, movies literally find their voice with the first talkie. It changed entertainment forever. Every single one of these was another crack in the old way of doing things.
And if you had to pick just one person to symbolize this whole new era, it would have to be her. The flapper. I mean, she was the walking, talking embodiment of this break from tradition, and she was absolutely impossible to ignore.
So what made the flappers so revolutionary? It wasn't just the bobbed hair or the shorter skirts, which, by the way, were incredibly shocking at the time. It was the whole package. She had the right to vote, she acted independently, and she very consciously rejected the super strict, rigid roles that her mother's generation had been forced into. She was, in every single way, the new woman.
And this brilliant quote from the great Langston Hughes, it just perfectly captures the spirit of another cultural explosion, the Harlem Renaissance. It was a declaration, right, that African-American voices were a crucial, undeniable part of the American story. And that idea fueled this unbelievable outpouring of music and art and literature.
For the very first time, technology was creating a shared national culture. Think about it. It didn't matter if you were in a huge city or a tiny town. The radio brought the exact same jazz song into your living room, and the movie theater showed you the exact same Hollywood stars. This was the birth of mass culture, a really powerful, unifying force that completely reshaped American identity.
But all of this cultural energy, it didn't just happen in a vacuum. It was being powered by an economic engine unlike anything the world had ever seen before. Just let that number sink in. The total wealth of the United States more than doubled in less than 10 years. This wasn't just, steady growth. This was an absolute explosion of prosperity that fundamentally changed daily life for millions of people.
So what was the secret sauce? What drove this crazy boom? Well, it was like a perfect storm of innovation. You had widespread electrification powering all these new labor-saving home appliances. Mass production, which was pioneered by Henry Ford, made things like cars affordable for an average family. And maybe most importantly, the rise of easy credit and installment plans meant you didn't have to save for years to buy these new things. You could have it all, right now.
And really, the ultimate symbol of this whole new consumer era was the automobile. Henry Ford's Model T wasn't just a car. It was freedom on 4 wheels. It totally changed where people could live, where they could work, even how they dated. It just created this whole new sense of possibility and mobility. And in the process, it physically reshaped the entire country.
But here's where the story gets really complicated. Because for all the parties and all the prosperity and progress, there was a powerful and often violent backlash simmering just underneath it all. The roar of the 20s wasn't just the sound of a party, it was also the sound of a really big fight.
And this slide just lays it out so perfectly, doesn't it? It shows the two faces of the decade. On one side, you have all the symbols of modernity, jazz, the flapper, scientific progress, and on the other side, a powerful counter-movement that was desperately trying to pull America back to a more traditional, and in their view, a more moral past. This was the central conflict of the Roaring Twenties.
This fight showed up in a few key areas. You had prohibition, the nationwide ban on alcohol.
It was meant to enforce traditional morality, but instead it gave us speakeasies and gangsters like Al Capone. You had nativism and racism seeing this massive comeback with the Ku Klux Klan, which led to really restrictive immigration laws. And then the culture wars just blew up in the famous Scopes monkey trial, which was literally a courtroom battle over teaching evolution in schools.
I mean, the story of Prohibition is the perfect example of this contradiction, right? The government passes this huge law to enforce traditional values, but in reality, all it did was drive the party underground into secret bars and fuel the rise of organized crime. It was a massive, spectacular failure.
So what are we supposed to do with this story of contradictions? How do we make sense of a decade that was at the same time an age of incredible liberation and an age of incredible intolerance? Okay, so here's the crucial takeaway, the one thing to remember. The Roaring Twenties was not just some decade-long party that ended with a stock market crash. No way. It was the foundational battleground for modern America. All those conflicts between urban and rural, between science and religion, progress and tradition, those were the battle lines that were drawn in the 1920s. And you know what? We are still fighting on that exact same ground today.
And that kind of leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? The Roaring Twenties really defined these conflicts between the city and the country, science and religion, between a diverse modern future and a nostalgic traditional past. So now, a century later, the question is, are we still fighting on that same battleground? What do you think?